Now, more than 7 weeks after the restrictions were imposed to stop the spread of coronavirus, some people in England were being encouraged to return to work today. The government guidelines say that they should do so if it is safe. And the change highlights the difference between England and the other nations of the United Kingdom, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, where the message remains very firmly to stay at home. So how are different businesses managing to reopen and still keep to the guidelines? Our business correspondent Emma Simpson has been investigating.
We are so excited to be open. 2 days ago, this was an empty shell where we'd had to give everything away.
But this garden centre is now back in bloom and back in business. Very different to the start of lockdown.
It was probably early March when we ran the numbers one day, and I think the next morning I woke up and I actually cried into my breakfast because we were going to lose staff and plants galore, and you just thought it was going off a cliff. But here we are.
And here are his customers. Lots of them. They're excited too.
We're after hanging baskets, compost and some begonias.
Yes, well, I'm there to carry it.
So it's a one-way system.
Some new rules, and the signs are everywhere. Staff with headsets to monitor and control the shoppers. Shelley had been furloughed, but didn't hesitate to come back.
It's really good to just be normal, actually. It feels like it's normal again, even though it's not.
It's all hands on deck here to salvage what's left of the season. But for other businesses, getting back to work is going to be far slower and gradual. They make concrete blocks at this factory in Telford. Like a lot of manufacturers, they've already been working with a skeleton staff. 7 more came back today. There's plenty of this now in the fight against COVID-19. It's all about being careful and keeping your distance.
You can't see it, but you've got to be scared of it, haven't you? I mean, I've personally got slight concerns, but not, that I'm going to get anything through the lads here.
And for all employers now, some grey areas ahead.
Liability is the great thing, isn't it? We don't know because we're in uncharted territory. So, how do we know where they're going to contract it? We don't. We're trying our best to keep them as far apart as possible and to look after them with respect to COVID-19. But how they do that themselves when they're not here, who they come into contact with, we don't know.
He supplies to house builders. This estate agent sells them. People in England can now move home. This office is open by appointment only.
We are able to conduct viewings face-to-face. We'll be making sure that doors are left open so that clients won't be touching certain surfaces. We'll be distancing, obviously, 2 metres at least as much as possible.
Employers are having to adapt, and they're keen not to rush it in what will be a slow unwinding of the lockdown. Emma Simpson, BBC News.
The European Commission has issued new guidelines on tourism and travel for EU member states to follow as they ease the coronavirus lockdown. A phased approach would begin with allowing in seasonal workers, and restrictions would then be relaxed between regions where the virus was under a similar level of control. We'll hear from our correspondents in Spain and Italy in just a moment, but first to Brussels and this report by our Europe editor Katya Adler.
An overnight leap from lockdown to European beach party, this certainly isn't. EU countries are only just beginning to lift their lockdown measures. Here in Belgium, they're opening the shops, next week the schools, but with strict social distancing measures in place. So what does that mean for our holidays? Well, ultimately, each EU country decides for itself when to open its beaches and borders to European visitors. Brussels can only advise. But today the advice was slowly. First, open your borders to workers and for goods that you need to get your economies going again. Then think of tourism. If there's enough testing and tracing capacity for COVID-19, and if there's strict rules on accommodation, transport and leisure activities. And if there's a second big wave of infection, then travel restrictions could be reimposed. So basically, don't pack your summer swimsuit yet.
While in Brussels, they're talking about plans for easing travel. Here in Spain, they're moving in the opposite direction. From Friday, a new quarantine will be in place for all arrivals from outside the country. 2 weeks in isolation. Here in Madrid, there's a bit more traffic in the centre and some businesses are starting to open, but we're under tight restrictions still. Around the country, it's different. In some regions, the easing is going ahead. Bars and cafes open outdoors, people able to gather in groups of up to 10. Here, that won't happen until tracing systems are in place to identify and shut down any new virus outbreaks. And hotels, well, they can open, but many say they're not going to until those new international arrivals start to happen again.
Grazie. Last week, Italy got this essential freedom back, the takeaway espresso. Along with reopening parks and allowing family visits, it marked the initial easing of the world's longest lockdown. On Monday, libraries and museums reopen, and possibly restaurants and hairdressers too. They're deciding on that tomorrow. Schools are shut till September. It's a relief, but it's also nerve-wracking as the first Western country to be overwhelmed by the virus waits to see if this prompts another spike, especially if Italy relaxes the 2-week quarantine on entering and follows EU guidelines to ease travel.
My colleague Mark Lowen there in Rome, ending that segment on the view in some European countries.